Why is God allowing this to happen? Why is God remaining silent? What's happening here? How can this amount to any good? These are questions that come naturally to us when we're in the middle of severe afflictions or problems. And the Christian answer is, there's a lot of good that can come out of our suffering. Because God is there and He works in a certain way. The way He works is He brings good out of terrible problems. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, now this time we're looking at verse 3 to 11. We're not looking at everything. I want to show you from these verses 3 good things with God's help can come out of your bad problem. The first good outcome is this: greater reliance upon God. Greater reliance or greater trust upon God. God uses our problem, bad problem, terrible problem, to make us rely more upon Him. For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and He will deliver us. On Him we have set our hope that He will deliver us again. He recognizes that the very fact that he's feeling so hopeless is an indication that he's not fully relying on God. And he shifts his reliance upon God. And next step is the victory. Verse 10, right? Once this turning point happens, once he shifts his reliance, verse 10, He delivered us from such a deadly peril. God delivered him. Everybody say, He delivered us. God delivered him, right? Once you rely fully upon God, if you rely fully upon God, you cannot lose. You cannot lose. You will not be put to shame. Those who trust in the Lord will never be put to shame. Good outcome number 2. Let's go to the second good outcome that Paul points out here. This one, so the first outcome is something good for us. That is, we grow in our faith, in our reliance upon God, so that now we are stronger. Now we have this experience. Now we can face a bigger mountain also. Right? So it's something good in us, for us, and we've seen a lot of that in James as well. Now the second outcome that I'm going to show you is not something good for us, but it's something good for others through us. It's good for others through us. Now let me show you this from 2 Corinthians 1 verse 3 and 4. And when you read 4, look carefully. 2 Corinthians 1, 3 and 4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. We saw a lot of this last week, mainly that word comfort, which I said is mainly encouragement, and comfort is part of encouragement. As you know, we saw last week, these 2 verses have a lot of truth in it. But you know what the highest truth here is? What's the high point of verse 4? Take verse 4 alone. What's the high point of verse 4? There are many truths in it, but what's the highest truth? What's the greatest goal mentioned in verse 4? You know, for example, there's a truth in verse 4 which says, He comforts us in all our affliction. Everybody say all. There's not a single affliction that you will go through or suffering where God will not provide His encouragement. In everyone, without fail, God will encourage. God will comfort. That's a wonderful truth. But is that the high point of verse 4? No. The high point of verse 4 is what? Not that God comforts us in all our affliction, but look what Paul goes on to say. He says, God comforts us in all our affliction, so that, everybody say, so that. So that means that's a higher goal. So that, what's the goal? We may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. It's an amazing truth here. Paul is saying, don't, consider your problem as so big, your suffering and your affliction as so big. God is going to comfort you. God is going to encourage you. And that encouragement will be more than enough for you to face this. But even that is not the highest end The highest end is not just for you to be encouraged, you to feel good, you to keep persevering, you to grow in faith, you to see the victory, you to come out. That is all good, but that's not the highest end. The highest end is what? So that we may be able to comfort others. So that we may be able to comfort others. Those who are in any affliction. So that we may be able to comfort others who are in any affliction. The highest goal is not just for me to receive God's encouragement, comfort, come out of this problem victoriously, but having come out, I should be able to comfort and encourage others who are in affliction, others who are suffering. Isn't this true? Look at what Paul says. He says, so that we may be able. Everybody say, be able. Be able. Be able. He's saying, only if this happens, we will be able. So that we may be able, have the ability to comfort others. The ability to comfort others is not something that you can just buy. It's not just something that you can just get trained in like that or study even. The ability to comfort others, being able to comfort others in suffering and affliction is a very precious thing, is a very valuable thing. And how it comes is, when we are in affliction, God comforts us. And when God comforts us, then we are able to comfort those who are in affliction. This is so true if you think about it. You see, this experience, Paul is seeing the value of the experience. See, what good can come out of this, people say, right? Paul says this experience is very valuable. Why? Not just because we are suffering, no. But when we go through problems and affliction, God does something. He comforts and encourages us. He makes us strong. And He causes us to be victorious. And when that happens, now you come out, you don't just get the victory. It's not just good for you. Now you have the ability. Everybody say ability again. You have the ability to comfort others. He's saying this experience is valuable to help others. If you think about it, if someone has never gone through any great difficulty or challenge, how can they really help those in great challenges? Think about it. Their ability to help others in great challenges will be very limited, right? If there's a person, they've not gone through anything, right? Imagine, here's a person who's just living a comfortable life, no challenge, no problem, just sitting there watching TV all day. Do you say, I admire that person, that's the kind of person I want to be, Face nothing, accomplish nothing, just comfortable. Do you admire that kind of person? No, we don't admire that kind of person. Who do we admire? We admire the person who has gone through all kinds of trouble, affliction, challenge, but they've come out victoriously. That's the person we admire. That tells us that's the person we really want to be. That's the person who can understand the suffering of other people. Only the person who has gone through to a certain extent can truly understand the suffering of other people. They can truly identify with the suffering and the challenges of people. They can put themselves in the other person's shoes. When you see a person who's gone through hell and come out victoriously, just watching them live is an inspiration for you, isn't it? Just seeing them, even if you never talk to them, just seeing them, hearing about them is an inspiration. It inspires you. And when they talk, you will listen. When they talk, you will listen. When I speak 100 words, I don't know how much you listen. Right? Just kidding, you listen. But when a person like that talks, we will listen more carefully. Why? Because we see the value of their experience. They're not just talking saying, here's this verse, here's that. They're saying, this has been true in my life. It has worked. It has brought me up out of this. It's worked for me, it'll work for you. Now we're listening very carefully. It's not just advice when they give it. It's proven. There is value to their experience. That's what Paul is saying. Paul has gone through so much affliction, so much suffering, and he has found a way to deal with it, handle it, see it in a certain way. He doesn't just see how much he suffers. No, he sees beyond the suffering to God's comfort. He says, more than the suffering, God has comforted me so much. God has encouraged me so much, strengthened me so much. His grace is always sufficient for me. He sees that. And then he sees beyond that. It's not just enough for me. When God encourages and strengthens me, it gives me the ability to encourage others, strengthen others, right? Give the keys for somebody else's victory. Lead another person to victory. Help a person who's going through a terrible problem. What I have gone through is very valuable because it turns out it helps me when I am trying to help others. That's what Paul is saying. It's a very exalted way of looking at suffering. It's a biblical way. If you want to really appreciate this, I think you should see the extent to which Paul suffered. There is a chapter in this book, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, where Paul lists out his suffering. I want you to see that because you will appreciate more, I think. A person who suffered so much, like the Apostle Paul, is able to look beyond the suffering and even beyond God's comfort to himself, to the way God will comfort and strengthen and encourage others. He's able to look all the way to how God will make this suffering count. He will make it meaningful. He will bring something good, so good that a lot of other people will be helped. He's able to see that. And it's amazing that he's able to see that despite what he has gone through. Look at the list of his suffering. He mentions it here like nowhere else. 2 Corinthians 11:22. He says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, besides the other things what comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. If you feel bad about your problems, you can read Paul's list. You'll feel better about yourself. As you can see, this is not an ordinary suffering. I read this for many reasons because I wanted you to see it. I don't want you to get the idea that, we are suffering like Paul. Paul suffered like us and here's something. No, Paul suffered much worse than us. This suffering is, we can't even say this is for, all the missionaries or all the evangelists. Paul's suffering is quite unique. It's very, very terrible, very, really too much. There's some people who suffer more. Right? We can't say we all suffer like that. No. And Paul was one of them. He suffered so much. Even when Jesus called him, he gave him an idea. He says, you will have to suffer. It's part of the calling. There is great blessing, there is great purpose, but there is also a little bit of suffering. And you will suffer for my name. And his suffering was unique. Greater than many. It was unique in the fact that he was an apostle. It was unique in the fact that he was a very special apostle chosen to write half the New Testament. You cannot compare with the Apostle Paul. You cannot say we suffer like him. No, he suffered much worse. Why I say this is, so when you take his passages on suffering, there are things that will apply to us more than it applies to him. There are things that will not apply so much to us and apply only to him, more to him. What I'm saying is you have to recognize the uniqueness of the Apostle Paul and the uniqueness of his suffering, the severity of his suffering. But why I'm also pointing this out is a man who suffered so much. People who suffer so much, if a person just had one of these experiences, say one shipwreck, what would a person like that do today if they went through a shipwreck? They'll write a book and become famous and they'll run the whole life on that one experience. Even a person in ministry, if they had an experience like this, they'll go around talking about that experience and base the whole ministry on that experience. One experience like this will just carry a person's life or something like that. Paul had so many of these suffering experiences and he never mentions it anywhere else, here only. And he mentions it for a reason, because this Corinthian church are one rowdy bunch. There are some in the Corinthians, from 1 Corinthians, all the problems that they had. And then now Paul has made it a little better. 2 Corinthians is not as harsh a letter. But even in 2 Corinthians, Paul is addressing some concerns. Because there are some people, there are two groups in the Corinthian church. One group is looking at him and saying, what? qualification do you have to be an apostle? How can you call yourself God's chosen? Look at how you're suffering. The very fact you're suffering so much shows God doesn't like you. God is punishing you. Paul is trying to say, no. There is affliction sometimes, and God comforts us. His strength is enough, and so on. There's another group within the Corinthian church who's saying, what qualification do you have to be a great apostle? What have you done? Have you done as much as the other apostles? And so Paul, to these people, to put them in their place, he kind of gives this list. He says, if I want to boast, I can also boast. I have suffered more than the others. Want to talk about suffering? I also have my share of suffering. But what I want you to see here is, despite suffering so much, despite going through so much suffering and affliction, far worse than any of us, Paul is able to see his suffering and affliction in a different light. That's what amazes me. He could have seen it in a different way. He could have seen it like how sometimes we see it, or some people say, when they're suffering and they're in pain, they say, why did God do this to me? Is God upset with me? Is God punishing me? He could have seen it like that. The Corinthians, some of them were seeing it like that. They were disqualifying him, looking at his suffering, saying, God is punishing you. Paul could have taken that approach. He could have seen it in a different way. You know how some people, when they're going through problems, when something bad happens, they'll say, did this happen because I did something bad? Is it because of this sin I did that now I'm facing this? People get hung up on all kinds of questions, right? One of the questions is this: am I suffering for what I did? I did this bad thing and now I'm facing the consequences. And they're just hung up there. They're stuck there. They're stuck in that place of looking back at their past and wondering, this is why I'm here in this place of affliction. Paul could have thought like that, couldn't he? Paul could have thought saying what? Because I persecuted Christians, now I myself am being persecuted. Because I dragged Christian brothers to jail, now they are dragging me. Because I had people beaten up because they preached the gospel. You see, Paul was a great persecutor of the church before he believed in Christ. He could have thought saying, I dragged people, I did all this to people, now they're doing the same thing to me. Because of this only it's happening. And he could have sat in a state of, regret and despair. Oh, why did I do this? I'm facing all this because of that. Because I was responsible for the death of Stephen. All this is happening to me. Yeah, he could have thought. But he doesn't. That's what amazes me. Despite going through so much affliction, so much suffering, he's able to put these questions aside. You think these things didn't occur to him? He puts it aside and he looks beyond. He looks to God's comfort. He says greater than the suffering is God's comfort. Everybody say God's comfort. God's encouragement. The amazing thing about people who suffer a lot for Christ, they don't make much of their suffering. Have you noticed that? You see all the great people of God, the missionaries, the apostles, they will not exalt their suffering too much. Others only will exalt. Oh, he suffered so much. You ask them, they'll say, I'm not only ready to suffer so much, I'm ready to suffer more also. They'll say like that. They'll say, this is nothing. God's comfort was greater. God's encouragement was greater. His grace was greater. That's the way Paul was, you see. He exalted not his suffering, but God's comfort, God's encouragement, God's grace. My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect. He experienced God's divine comfort and strength in his weakness. He was beaten 5 times, right? He said, 40 minus 1 lashes, 39. That beating, one beating, by the time you come to the end of that, it'll feel like almost you die, it seems. It'll feel like you're almost going to die. The pain from that. And then to recover from that itself is a torture, they say. 5 times he was beaten like that. I mean, how did he face all that? How did he face? Well, God specially strengthened him. God specially comforted him. God specially healed him. God specially gave him physical strength and physical healing. One time he was left outside the city for dead. People thought he was dead. They left him there. He woke up and he came back. I mean, that must have been a miracle. God did some amazing miracles. Greater than the suffering, Paul experienced God's great miracles. Great comfort, great strength, great grace, great energy. And he makes much of that. And even beyond that, Paul looks forward, not backward, saying, oh, because I persecuted others, I'm being persecuted. No, he looks forward and he says, God is making me able to comfort many, many others. God didn't send the suffering. But what's God doing now? He is making me able. Everybody say able. He's making me able to comfort others. God is making me able so that we may be able, right? What does he say? God comforts us in all our afflictions so that we may be able. How many people have been comforted by Paul's writings? Just think of it. Not just the Corinthians. I think Paul would have only thought, these Corinthians will be comforted. Some other people who I'm writing, I don't think he would have pictured 2,000 years later from the time of this letter, in AFT church, people will be comforted from the comfort he received from God. You think he would have pictured that? No way. But he looks forward. He expects God to do something great. God comforts us so that we may be able to comfort those who are in affliction.